"I wish you could be my husband, human," the alien woman made a shocking confession to me. The landing thrusters coughed twice before stabilizing, a charming little quirk that always made me question whether Earth's diplomatic ships were built with second-hand parts from a scrapyard on Mars. As the deck hummed beneath my boots and the final hiss of the pressurized hatch faded, I braced myself for first contact with a race that had, until recently, considered humans to be functionally decorative but strategically irrelevant, which, if you've ever met a few Earth ambassadors, isn't entirely unfair. I stepped onto Shirellon's surface with all the confidence of a man who had spent 3 months rehearsing ceremonial greetings in a language that included no fewer than 17 tonal inflections for the word hello. One misstep, and I might have been calling someone's grandmother a war criminal, or worse, complimenting the wrong ear. I adjusted the translator patch at my neck and followed the glowing path projected by a pair of disembodied orbs. Ceremonial escorts, I'd been told, though they bore a suspicious resemblance to floating garden gnomes with anxiety issues. Shirellon. Everything about the place shimmered like someone had set a science museum on fire and let the smoke rebuild itself. The sky was a permanent watercolor of gold and violet, the clouds thin and crystalline, drifting like fish skeletons through syrup. The 2 moons loomed above, one pale as pearl, the other tinged with a soft crimson, like a blush caught in orbit. At the end of the reception platform, a contingent of Giroloni officials awaited me, all garbed in flowing fabrics that shimmered and sighed with every movement. The Supreme Arbiter himself stood front and center, wearing a ceremonial mantle that, from a distance, resembled an angry peacock made entirely of starlight. His face was unreadable, angular, severe. I bowed with the precise angle dictated by the Shirelloni Diplomatic Guidebook, Volume 1 of 11. He did not return it. Instead, his gaze flicked past me to something or someone behind me. That's when I heard it, the soft, musical voice that would later unravel the mission, reprogram my loyalties, and possibly turn me into a footnote in 2 species textbooks. "Your translator is set to high formal," she said, "which means you just told my father you hope his digestive orbs fall off." I turned. She was tall, not exaggeratedly so, but in the way someone looks tall even when they're seated, even when they're mocking you. Her skin held a faint iridescence, like light dancing on deep water, and her hair was silver, not the age kind, but silver as if moonlight had learned to braid itself, and her ears, long, elegant, curving back like the wings of a sleek bird just about to take flight. When she smiled, one side lifted faster than the other, like the universe had only half approved her mischief. "You must be the human," she added, stepping forward, "the one who was supposed to bring peace and accidentally declared digestive war." Yes. "Hello," I said, then paused. In the most neutral possible tone, she narrowed her eyes. "Nice recovery. I'm Varel." We shook hands. Well, we approximated it. The Giroloni didn't traditionally use handshakes, too many sensitive nerve clusters in the palms, apparently. So our version was more of a 3-fingered press followed by an awkward hover. It felt like we were about to cast a spell on each other. The Arbiter gave a grunt that could have meant proceed or die slowly, and the entourage turned and began their elegant glide back toward the palace. Varel fell into step beside me, hands clasped behind her back. "You Earth people always walk like you're expecting gravity to betray you." "Is it that obvious?" I asked, trying to keep my stride from looking too defensive. "Only when you're not tripping over your own dignity." We passed under a shimmering archway that translated us into the inner sanctum. Literally translated, our molecular structure was recalibrated for compatibility with the palace's frequency field, which the guidebook assured me was completely safe, a phrase I no longer trusted after the great Tirantha diplomatic soup incident. Inside, the palace gleamed with surfaces that pulsed like quiet hearts. Walls weren't walls exactly. They changed color with thought proximity, and once when I thought about coffee, the nearest panel displayed a steaming mug with a question mark. I ignored it. Focus, I reminded myself. Peace talks, protocol, not falling into sarcastic banter with a woman who could have me vaporized with a gesture. She caught me looking at her ears. Beautiful, aren't they? She said without missing a beat. Aerodynamic, culturally significant, good for listening to government lies. I was going to say they look like they'd pick up Wi-Fi. She tilted her head, mock pensive. What's Wi-Fi? Something humans use to get angry at routers. She laughed. It was light, unexpected. A flash of warmth in a palace designed to intimidate. As we entered the main diplomatic chamber, she turned to me more seriously. Tomorrow the real talks begin, but tonight you'll attend a welcoming feast. Do try not to insult the ancestral fungi. The what now? You'll know them. They glow when offended. Sure enough, hours later, I sat at a banquet table beside Veril as a platter of gently pulsing mushrooms was placed before me. The fungi quivered slightly, then let out a sound that could only be described as a sigh of judgment. I think it's already mad at me, I whispered. That's just its way of saying hello, she replied, then leaned close enough for me to feel the hum of her presence. Though if it turns red, throw your drink on it. Sierra customs are very specific. Oh, this isn't custom. This is survival. Dinner passed in a haze of color and barely contained cultural missteps. Veril took great delight in feeding me deliberately confusing information. At one point, she claimed that refusing dessert was a mating proposal. I nearly swallowed my fork. But later, when the crowd had thinned and the twin moons cast silver light through the palace's high canopy, I found myself alone with her on a veranda lined with crystalline plants that whispered like wind chimes. She was quiet for a while, gazing upward. You think this is a mission, she said? That you're here to talk, sign, leave. That's the plan. She looked at me then, her eyes violet, luminous, held something I hadn't seen before. Not mockery, not mischief. A question, a warning. It won't go according to plan, she said. I didn't ask how she knew. I just nodded, a breath caught in my throat. Somewhere far below, one of the ancestral fungi exploded in a puff of indignation. We both laughed, and for a moment, peace felt possible. I woke up to the sound of a Zerolonian alarm tone, which I can only describe as what you'd hear if a sentient waterfall and a jazz saxophone had a disagreement in a wind tunnel. My translator chip cheerfully informed me it meant, the sun has risen, attempt consciousness. Very motivational. I slapped the embedded snooze node in the bedside panel, which in response gently zapped my fingertips and said, no. The guest quarters assigned to me were somewhere between luxurious and mildly accusatory. Everything shimmered, walls, furniture, air, with that faint Zerolonian energy signature that made humans feel like they'd entered a sentient art gallery. Even my toothbrush judged me. It blinked in disapproval until I used it correctly, then rewarded me with a flavor it insisted was moon mint. It tasted like carbonated regret. As I dressed, the mirror made a soft pinging noise and offered wardrobe suggestions, all of which made me look like I was auditioning for a role in an opera about a tragic pastry chef. I chose the least ruffled option. Still looked like a flamboyant bookmark, but apparently that was considered low-key around here. Veril met me outside the chamber with a smirk that curled at the corners like a secret message. You look like a diplomatic penguin, she said. I picked the serious emissary option. Ah yes, serious penguin. She walked ahead of me, her silver hair catching the sun through the crystalline ceiling. I'd only been on Shiralone a day, but I'd already learned two things. The light was never the same color twice, and Veril never offered an opinion without the option to regret hearing it. Today was our first real negotiation session. The official agenda had been delivered in a glowing orb that hovered in my room all night, softly muttering policy points in its sleep. I followed Veril through the corridors of the palace, which shifted their layout depending on political moods. A real joy during tense times, since your office might migrate into a broom closet. We arrived at the negotiation chamber a full 10 minutes early, which according to Zerolonian etiquette meant we were technically spiritually late. Inside, the room thrummed with quiet hostility. On one side, Earth's delegation, Ambassador Wexler, who looked perpetually annoyed that peace didn't come with a refund policy, and 3 assistants with earpieces and emotional allergies. On the other side, the Arbiter's Council, all cloaked in shimmering dark material that seemed to ripple when they blinked. I took my place beside Wexler, who greeted me with the warm, inviting words, "Don't speak unless I make eye contact." That was fine. My plan was mostly to breathe, smile, and not offend any ancestral ghosts. Veryl sat across from me, legs crossed, her face composed but unreadable. The Arbiter entered last, a presence that immediately recalibrated the room's emotional gravity. His voice was like stone being slowly grated into meaning. "The terms from Earth," he said, "are predictable." That was the opener. Wexler responded by smiling with the temperature of deep space and saying, "We aim for consistency." From there, it was a back and forth that could have been lifted straight from a script written by two lawyers who hate their own scripts. Words like concessions, protocol assurance, and quantum perimeter rights were volleyed across the table with increasing theatrical flourish. I kept my eyes on Veryl, who only once looked up and caught my gaze. Her expression said, "This is going nowhere." I replied with a subtle head tilt that meant, should I fake a coughing fit or set off the fire alarm? The session ended with the same amount of peace as it started with, none. Wexler stood, announced something about recalibrating our position, and swept out like a man who had just survived being mildly inconvenienced. I made to follow, but Veryl intercepted me in the hall, blocking my path with the elegance of someone who knew palace geometry better than Google Maps. "Congratulations," she said. "You've survived your first diplomatic staring contest. Do we win anything if we blink first?" "Just the privilege of being insulted in more languages." She motioned for me to follow her down a side corridor that pulsed with a soft blue glow. I hesitated. "Am I allowed to go wherever you're taking me, or is this going to end with a polite incarceration?" "Trust me," she said. "If I wanted you arrested, I'd have chosen a corridor that smelled like betrayal and formaldehyde. This one leads to snacks." Snacks, as it turned out, meant a private viewing garden suspended over a kinetic lake that responded to emotional states. As we stepped into the open-air platform, the lake below shimmered with soft greens and curious blues. A single silver tree stood in the center of the garden, its leaves playing a quiet melody as the breeze passed through. Veryl sat on a bench and tossed me a small pouch. "Try the Zen nuts," she said. "They taste like citrus and anxiety." I bit into one. You weren't kidding. They're a local delicacy, traditionally eaten before battle or first dates. You people really like confusing your taste buds. Confusion is the highest form of respect. We sat in silence for a moment. The wind changed and the lake shifted to a dusky purple. "Your people don't understand us," she said suddenly. "We're trying. That's why we're here." "Number, you're trying to make us understand you. That's not the same thing." I looked at her. She wasn't teasing now. "You think we want war? I think you want control, and you're terrified that we'll give it to you on our terms, not yours." I reached into the pouch again, chewing thoughtfully. "You're not what I expected," I said. "Long ears?" "Sure. That, and the fact that you haven't tried to poison me yet." She grinned. "Give it time." The lake below turned a gentle pink. That evening, back in my quarters, I received a message capsule. It hovered beside my bed and played a hologram of Wexler's disapproving face. "Stay focused," he said. "We're not here to make friends." The message ended. I turned toward the window. The twin moons had risen, casting light like twin questions hanging in the sky. I tapped the control panel, dimmed the room, and lay back with a sigh. Then from the far corner of the room, a small sound, my translator patch whispering quietly as it updated its lexicon. New phrase added, "Zen nut humor," affectionate sarcasm between potential allies. I smiled. Maybe, just maybe, the glossary was growing. The hover lift to the inner archive moved at precisely the speed of contemplation, which is to say it crept forward like it was composing poetry in real time. I stood inside the glass cylinder, hands behind my back like a respectable ambassador, and not a man whose breakfast had tried to recite local philosophy before disintegrating into a pile of bitter foam. Zerolonian cuisine, I was beginning to suspect, was designed less for nutrition and more for psychological fortitude. Veryl stood beside me, utterly composed, wearing a jacket made of something that shimmered like starlight on water. Her ears twitched occasionally, whether out of amusement or annoyance, I couldn't tell. but she kept her eyes forward. We hadn't spoken since the evening in the garden. I wasn't sure if she was waiting for me to say something profound or just enjoying the silence. Either way, I ruined it. Just checking, I said. This archive, it doesn't by any chance eat people's memories, does it? Veril didn't even blink. Only the boring ones. Well, good. That explains what happened to my high school years. You remembered your high school years? Fascinating. I wish I didn't. There was a hair phase. The lift sighed as it stopped. Doors parted with the sound of a content exhale, and we stepped into a space that immediately made my earthborn brain short-circuit. The inner archive wasn't a room. It was a concept rendered in geometry. Layers upon layers of information floated in soft, glowing lattices suspended midair, each humming faintly with stored data. Stairs spiraled into dimensions I suspected weren't entirely legal under local space-time ordinances. A small, floating orb zipped toward us. It paused to scan me with a beam that made my fillings itch. Ambassador Tarek, it chirped. Classification, questionably significant. Clearance, tentative. Humor quotient, 7.3 out of 10. Acceptable. I feel like I've just been graded by a sentient quiz app. Correct, the orb replied before flitting away. Veril turned, one eyebrow raised. Congratulations. The archive finds you amusing. My parents would be so proud. We moved deeper into the archive. Veril gestured and one of the floating data clusters unfurled like a blossom, revealing rows of holographic symbols that reassembled themselves into Earth standard for my benefit. It was a treaty draft, an older one. The original terms of engagement between the Earth Coalition and the Zarellan Accord from before the war broke out. Your leaders think we broke the treaty, she said. Well, I began, choosing my words like someone picking mushrooms in a radioactive forest. Our intelligence reports. Yes, she interrupted. Your intelligence, based on intercepted communications, out-of-context transmissions, and the ever-reliable human instinct. Look, I'm not defending it. I'm just saying our side's paranoid. With good reason. We haven't invaded anyone in 2 cycles. Yeah, well, you've got the ships for it. And you've got the paranoia for it. She touched the cluster again. It reshaped into a war timeline. Red flares marked the first conflict points. Civilian casualties, fleet movements. I looked away. War data always had the same taste. Metal and ashes, no matter the species. Veril didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. My brother was stationed near the Krezai border. First engagement. Your fleet thought it was a weapons outpost. It was a hospital. I read the report, I said. They said there was cloaking tech. They said what they had to. I saw the footage. She turned toward me, eyes not angry, not accusing, just tired, ancient somehow, like someone who'd been carrying too many explanations for too long. I'm not the enemy, I said. I'm here to fix this. Then why are you looking at me like I'm going to stab you with my ears? That's a fair question. She walked ahead, deeper into the archive. I followed, and we passed a floating sculpture made entirely of sound. I don't know how else to describe it. It shimmered with music I couldn't hear, but could somehow feel brushing against my skin. It vibrated memories I didn't know I had. So, I said, trying to lighten the gravity, when do I get to access the secret section? You know, the hidden files where you keep all the real conspiracy stuff? Already did, she said, not turning. We keep it in your room. You've been sleeping on it. That explains the nightmares about dancing cats and planetary taxation. They're connected, but that's classified. We reached a platform at the far end, and Veril tapped her bracelet. A private archive node opened, displaying a message sealed with a crest I didn't recognize. She turned to me. This isn't public, not yet, but I want you to see it. The message played. A figure, Zeralonian, male in military garb, spoke urgently in a dialect I couldn't follow. My translator struggled, caught a few words. Betrayal, neutral zone, forbidden directive. The image flickered and went dark. My father doesn't know I have this, she said. What does it mean? That the first shot may not have come from either side. That there are forces who profit from keeping us at war. Third party? She nodded. Or a faction, internal, rogue. You trust me with this? No, she said, but I trust myself. And I think, maybe you're not just another suit with a smile. I exhaled. I have more of a smirk, really. That's what worries me. We left the archive in silence, each step down the corridor heavier than before. At the end of the hall, she stopped. "You're going to get pressured to accelerate talks," she said. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because we're not negotiating peace," she said. "Not yet. First, we have to find out who's still fighting." That night, I couldn't sleep. The room was quiet, too quiet, the bed too adaptive. I got up, paced, replayed the message in my mind. Something was unraveling. The question was, would I be smart enough to follow the thread, or just get tangled in it? The comm panel chimed once, a message from Varel. It read, "If you disappear, I'll assume you opened the wrong archive drawer." They bite. I smiled, and then I started planning. It started with a sneeze, not mine, thankfully. Mine would have short-circuited the biometric sensors embedded in the council's peace dais. Again, and no one wanted a repeat of what happened in the Thraxian embassy when I sneezed during a moment of silence. The carpet never forgave me. No, this sneeze came from someone in the third row of the Galactic Chamber Gallery, which, due to Cyrillonian acoustics, echoed with the clarity of a cannon shot across a crystal lake. Varel didn't flinch. She stood beside me as we waited for the arbiter to begin. Dressed in another one of her infamous, diplomatically understated outfits, meaning it shimmered like it had been woven from nebula dust in pocket dimensions, she gave no indication that we were about to drop a black hole of a truth bomb into the galaxy's most delicately balanced peace negotiations. I leaned toward her and whispered, "If this goes badly, you're blaming me, right?" "Only in 7 languages," she replied. 8 if you start crying. The arbiter called the chamber to silence with a gesture that looked like he was politely dismissing a persistent soap bubble. Then he nodded at us, and the light shifted subtly, meaning we had the floor. I stepped forward, trying to look confident and not like a man currently wearing diplomatic undergarments that adjusted tightness based on stress levels. They were currently calibrated to boa constrictor. "My name is Ambassador Tarek Ryland," I began, "and I'd like to begin today's session with a few clarifying statements." Wexler from Earth's delegation gave me a look that said, "If you go off script, I will personally haunt your career from beyond the grave." I gave him my best oops, too late smile, and continued. "In reviewing the archival materials provided by our hosts," I said, choosing each word like it was armed, "we've discovered a message that suggests the initial incursion, which led to this conflict, may not have originated from either of our factions." Gasps, murmurs, one outright guffaw from a Bellari representative who clearly thought the idea of peace was funnier than interspecies comedy hour. Varel stepped forward. "We believe the instigating act was orchestrated by a rogue faction within our defense division, a group that has since gone silent, suspiciously so. The message implicates individuals who stood to gain from prolonged conflict. The chamber reacted like someone had suggested replacing their oxygen supply with carbonated nectar. Questions flew, accusations, and from Wexler's corner, an audible grind of molars. It was the arbiter who brought things back under control, his voice somehow bypassing sound and transmitting directly into your sense of guilt. "You are accusing both governments of being manipulated into war," he said. I nodded. "Not accusing, suggesting, politely, with open curiosity. Do you have evidence?" "Partial, but enough to begin a deeper inquiry." Varel added, "And we ask this be done not through closed investigations or backroom arrangements, but through the joint oversight of a neutral third party." The silence that followed was heavy. Then the arbiter spoke again, voice like crumbling stone. "We will consider your request. The chamber is adjourned." Back in the corridor, Wexler pulled me aside so sharply my earpiece recalibrated in protest. "What in the ever-expanding void was that performance?" he snapped. "I call it Saving the Galaxy, a one-ambassador play." Working title. You just accused our own intelligence of being duped. Technically, I suggested that someone smarter than our intelligence was pulling the strings. So really, it's a compliment. His face was the exact shade of someone who had just swallowed a lemon dipped in humiliation. Varel appeared beside me, holding 2 glasses of something effervescent and probably judgmental. "Drink this," she said to me. "It helps with after-meeting disappointment." I took a sip. It fizzed like joy and regret in equal measure. Tastes like citrus betrayal. High praise. Later, back in my quarters, I reviewed the message again. I'd memorized every flicker of the speaker's face, every irregularity in the transmission. He wasn't lying. You could tell in the way he blinked, too often like someone trying to push truth through fear. A soft chime interrupted my thoughts. Veryl had overridden the door again. She strolled in with a data crystal and what looked like a bag of edible chaos. "We've got a lead," she said. "A ship registry. It matches the signal bounce from the intercepted message. Let me guess, decommissioned, lost in a training exercise, or eaten by a gravity well. Option 4, still in operation, hidden under a private trading license on a neutral moon. Of course, because conspiracy always makes better use of bureaucracy than actual governments." She tossed the snack bag onto the table. It opened with a hiss and released the scent of nostalgia and what I assume teenage rebellion smells like in 16 different cultures. "We leave tonight," she said. "Us? As in just us?" Wexler said, and I quote, "Fine. Go dig through the galactic trash heap if it makes you feel important. So technically, this mission is powered by spite." I stood, stretched, and reached for a jacket that didn't scream, "Target me first," in alien dialect. I've always wanted a mission like that. 3 hours later, we were aboard a small courier ship so outdated it still had a slot for paper manuals. I piloted while Veryl calibrated the stealth field using settings that may or may not have included cloaked by existential uncertainty. The jump to the neutral moon's orbit was smooth. The ship coasted in quietly, avoiding the usual customs scans with a trick Veryl called being cleverer than underpaid moon security. "Ready?" she asked, strapping on a sidearm disguised as a bracelet. I checked my translator, my nerves, and the approximate tightness of my undergarments. Number. But I'm going anyway. We disembarked under the flicker of old orbital lanterns, the kind that buzzed when no one was watching. Ahead was a docking bay that supposedly held a ship which shouldn't exist, with a registry tied to a message that could collapse an interstellar war from the inside. Veryl walked ahead. I followed, trying not to think about how quiet the place was. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that you'd expect before a betrayal or before someone said something like, "We're not alone," which of course is exactly what she said next. We weren't alone. The words hung in the air like condensation on a cryochamber wall. My immediate response was to look around very slowly, as though moving too fast might startle whoever or whatever was watching us. Veryl naturally already had her bracelet weapon humming with restrained sarcasm. From the shadows of the docking bay, a figure stepped out, tall, humanoid, cloaked in something that shifted texture as it moved, like a malfunctioning chameleon coat. It didn't walk so much as glide, which seemed entirely unnecessary and, frankly, a little showy. "Identify yourself," Veryl said, voice sharp. "I could ask the same," the figure replied, voice smooth and androgynous, with a faint reverb like it had been rinsed through old radio waves. "Great," I muttered. A mysterious glider with an attitude. That's exactly what this trip was missing. "I am called Yex," it said, pulling back its hood. Its face was striking in the way a mirage is. Nearly human, eerily symmetrical, eyes that shimmered with shifting stars. Not Cyrillonian, not human either. Something else. Possibly a designer species from one of those private moons where rich clients ordered children the way humans used to order pizza. "You're not on the registry," Veryl said. Yex smiled like it owned several asteroids and the rights to your most embarrassing secret. "No one with answers ever is." I stepped forward. "We're looking for the vessel designated DS-113, a decommissioned craft registered under a defunct trading shell." Yex raised an eyebrow, an impressive feat considering it didn't appear to have visible hair follicles. "DS-113 hasn't been decommissioned. It's been hiding, and it doesn't like company." "Does it respond better to light threats or light bribery?" I asked. Yex tilted its head. "It responds to curiosity, and to this." It held up a shard of something crystalline, the same hue as the archive recording. I recognized the pattern immediately, a piece of the original encryption key. The ship's AI would respond to that like a loyal dog to a dinner bell. We followed Yex deeper into the bay, past rows of dormant freighters and a few clearly illegal refit jobs. The DS-113 sat tucked into the far end of the hangar like a guilty secret. It was older than I expected, its hull scarred, antenna array mismatched, a few of its panels replaced with what looked suspiciously like scavenged vending machine parts. Yex approached a console beside the boarding ramp and slotted in the crystal. The ship shuddered once, coughed digitally, and the ramp lowered with the reluctant grace of a tired butler. DS-113, Yex said. You have guests. Try not to be rude. The onboard lights flickered, then stabilized. Varel motioned for me to enter first. Why do I always go first? I asked. Because if there's a trap, I can use your screams to calibrate my response. I couldn't argue with that logic. The interior smelled faintly of ionized dust and forgotten intentions. A whisper of music filtered through the speakers, something old and haunting. The ship's AI greeted us in a tone that suggested it had been woken up from a very long nap and was considering if this moment was a nightmare. Unknown access, it said. Please state authorization. Archive fragment key, Zeta 113 Akari, Varel said. There was a pause, then a click, a whir, and a voice like a librarian who moonlighted as a spy murmured, Authorization recognized. Welcome back. You're late. A terminal blinked to life on the main console. Video logs, encrypted correspondence, and routing charts began scrolling across the display. My translator struggled with the data compression, so most of it came out like, Suspicious Action 01, probably bad. Suspicious Action 02, still bad. Suspicious Action 3, definitely shady. Varel leaned over the console. This is what we needed. These are the movement logs, covert rendezvous points. And here, she tapped a symbol that resembled an Ouroboros made of equations. This is the cell, the rogue faction. Any names? I asked. Yex, who had wandered in behind us, spoke before the ship could answer. Names would implicate important people, dangerous people, but yes, they're in there. I stared at the data, the implications unraveling like a spool of dark string. A faction embedded in both governments, manipulating fear, fanning conflict. War not as failure, but as product. Someone had weaponized distrust. Why are you helping us? Varel asked Yex finally. Yex considered that for a beat. Because I've seen what comes next. You wouldn't like it. That's cryptic and deeply unhelpful, I said. I'm not here to be helpful, Yex replied. I'm here to make sure the right people get the right kind of push. And if we're not the right people, then I suppose I'll have to push harder. The lights dimmed for a moment, probably the ship trying to make a dramatic statement. It succeeded. A new transmission blinked onto the screen. A meeting schedule, coordinates, encrypted tags. It was an upcoming rendezvous point. High-level attendees. Varel looked at me. They're meeting in 3 cycles. We intercept them, we expose them. Assuming they don't spot us and vaporize our atoms into regrettable mist, I added. Optimism, Tarek. It's very in this season. Yex stepped back, already fading into the shadows again like an overachieving ghost. Take what you need, but know this. The people you're going after have made entire star systems disappear. They won't blink at removing 2 diplomats with a talent for inconvenient truths. I gave a nervous smile. Good news. I'm not technically a full diplomat, just an ambassador with a very loose definition of safety. Varel turned back to the ship, downloading the logs into a secure drive. Then we better act fast, before someone makes us disappear too. As we left DS-113, I glanced back once. The ship powered down again, lights fading like a closing eye. Yex was gone, probably already plotting their next dramatic entrance. Back on our courier, Varel started plotting the new coordinates. I stared out the viewport, watching the stars swirl like scattered jewels. If we pull this off, I said, we won't just stop a war. We might actually start a peace. She looked over her shoulder, violet eyes amused. Let's not get sentimental. That's when people start dying. I grinned. You say the most romantic things. Don't tempt me, human. And with that, we jumped into the black, carrying the kind of truth that could fracture galaxies, or fix them. The coordinates led us to a gas giant with rings like shattered glass. and a reputation for discreet dealings. Orbiting it was an old diplomatic outpost known as Siraxis 5, technically neutral, unofficially corrupt, and exactly the kind of place where secrets wore name tags and bodyguards. We docked under falsified credentials so well forged, even I almost believed them. Varel adjusted her ear-lengthening adapter, an ancient Shirilonian infiltration tool she insisted was out of style, but still highly effective. Her already long ears shimmered with just enough biometric distortion to pass for someone else entirely. I, meanwhile, was wearing a scarf. Apparently, that and a smug expression qualified as disguise on this rock. The outpost's interior was a blend of faded elegance and hurried repairs. Ornate arches supported by scaffolding, floor tiles that flickered underfoot, and at least 3 smells I couldn't identify, one of which I suspected was burnt eel and optimism. Our destination was Suite Theta 9, a private chamber booked under the alias of a Zerolonian energy trader who, according to Varel, had been dead for 3 years but still maintained excellent credit. We made it 2 meters from the door before someone stepped into our path. He was big, blocky, and radiated the kind of intelligence one usually reserved for particularly ambitious doorstops. "Invitation," he said, voiced like someone had chewed gravel through a megaphone. Varel handed over a data card that shimmered with bureaucratic magic. He scanned it, his brow furrowed, then unfurrowed, then furrowed again, like he was trying out different expressions in case someone was watching. "You're not on the list," he grunted. "That's because we're not supposed to be," I said, flashing him the kind of grin that had gotten me both free drinks and minor head injuries. "We're surprises, the best kind." He looked unconvinced, so Varel stepped in. "Do you know who this is?" she asked, gesturing to me. "This is Krenax the Obliterator. He personally dismantled the trade convergence of Hral using only a fork." I blinked. The guard blinked. Varel leaned in. "Would you like to explain to your superior why you denied Krenax entry?" The guard slowly stepped aside. As we passed, I whispered, "A fork?" "You have the shoulders for it," she replied. "Trust me." Inside, the suite was dim and thick with perfume, politics, and pretension. Figures cloaked in anonymity murmured in corners, drinks in hand, secrets in their pockets. The room was shaped like a hexagon, probably a design choice meant to reflect balance and impartiality. Naturally, it felt like a trap. We split up. Varel moved with ease, blending in with the Shirilonian delegation, her posture shifting, her accent adjusted with surgical precision. I found a spot near the back, close to a buffet table that appeared to have been raided by someone unfamiliar with edible items. I pocketed a suspiciously glowing canapé for later analysis, or possibly as a weapon. Over the next hour, the attendees gradually dropped fragments of conversation like breadcrumbs. Trade disruption in Sector 9, artificially escalated skirmishes, disinformation protocols masquerading as peace proposals. It was all here, hidden in the jokes, couched in jargon, but undeniably real. These were the architects of the war's persistence, not generals, not politicians, brokers, movers of capital and fear. One conversation caught my ear. "If the human ambassador keeps digging, he'll need a closed casket funeral," someone said. "Well, he's certainly not digging alone," another added. "That Shirilonian witch is practically stapled to him." I fought the urge to wave cheerfully. Instead, I slipped closer, using a trick I'd learned from an old Martian pickpocket. Move like you belong, and people won't see you. The 2 speakers were part of the Orvathi Syndicate, a private intelligence consortium whose ethics were listed under pending. Their conversation revealed a crucial detail: a second meeting, off-record, off-world. The real players wouldn't risk appearing here. They were gathering on Sornexus Drift, a rogue asteroid with no law, no gravity stabilization, and no scruples. Varel reappeared at my side with the efficiency of a summoned ghost. "I heard the same," she whispered. "Sornexus Drift. We'll need faster clearance. We'll also need less conspicuous identities," I said. "One of those guys thinks I'm Krenax the Obliterator." "Well, try not to obliterate anything until we're airborne." Before we could leave, someone else stepped into our path. This one was not big and blocky. She was sharp, thin like a blade that smiled. Her uniform bore no insignia, but every thread screamed authority. I don't believe we've met, she said, looking at both of us with the interest of a scientist dissecting anomalies. Probably because we're incredibly boring, I offered. You'd forget us in seconds. She smiled without warmth. On the contrary, you're quite memorable. Tell me, Ambassador Rylan, do you often attend secret meetings without diplomatic sanction? Veril tensed beside me. I tried not to sweat through my scarf. Only when invited by dead people, I said. She tilted her head. You're walking a dangerous path. Isn't everyone? I replied. Life's just one long hazard warning. Her gaze flicked between us. Then she stepped aside. Enjoy the party, Ambassador, while it lasts. Back on the ship, Veril deactivated her disguise and collapsed into the co-pilot's chair. Who was she? I asked. I don't know, she said. But if I had to guess, someone who doesn't want peace. That narrows it down to half the galaxy. She sighed. Sornexus drift is unmonitored. We'll be flying blind. Perfect. I love surprise inspections, especially when the people we're inspecting might vaporize us. I set the course. The stars blurred as the jump drive spooled. You know, I said, this might be a good time to fake our deaths. Veril smirked. Only if we can do it dramatically. I want tears and a statue. I'll make sure they get your ears right. I'd haunt you if they didn't. And then we were gone, streaking toward the place where all secrets rot eventually, where the truth was waiting with a knife behind its back. Sornexus drift was exactly as lovely as a migraine made of asteroids and poor life choices. It spun in slow, bitter circles around a dead star, lit only by the blinking debris of other ships that hadn't quite made it off in one piece. The airspace was thick with rogue beacons and pirate chatter, half of it encrypted, the other half aggressively obscene. We slipped into orbit on silent mode, our ship mimicking the electromagnetic signature of a forgotten survey drone. The kind no one bothered to hack because, frankly, it wasn't worth the effort. Inside, Veril was assembling a disguise so elaborate it had its own zip code. I opted for my usual fallback, a change of jacket and a newfound confidence in my ability to improvise under fire, which, statistically speaking, was how most of my plans ended up anyway. Are you sure this is the only way? I asked, watching her tuck a plasma filament into her boot. Do you want to stop a war or not? She said. I was really hoping there'd be a third option where we mildly inconvenience it instead. She gave me a look that suggested we were, in fact, going to start a new war if I didn't shut up. We landed on Dock 9, beneath a canopy of rusted solar sails and smugglers trying to sell everything from grav boots to synthetic loyalty. No one looked at us twice, which in a place like Sornexus was the closest thing to a compliment. The meeting was already in progress by the time we reached the undervaults, an underground chamber carved into the asteroid's crust, humming with power dampeners and sound kill fields. Seated around the table were representatives of the factions Veril and I had spent the last 6 months dodging, double-crossing, and occasionally bribing with expensive tea. They didn't see us slip in. That was the first miracle. The second miracle was Yex. They emerged from the shadows like a particularly smug prophecy, their coat flaring in a way that should have been impossible in a no-breeze environment. They walked straight into the middle of the room and placed a data core on the table like a holy relic. This is everything, Yex said, voice amplified just enough to draw every eye. Every transaction, every manipulation, every whisper that kept the war going when peace was an option. For a moment there was silence, real silence. Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of movement, of breath. Then chaos. Several delegates reached for weapons. Others lunged for the data core. Veril was faster. Her bracelet flared, creating a stasis field that locked half the room in place like bugs in amber. I tackled a particularly aggressive ambassador with a history of using sentient plants as listening devices. We didn't win the fight so much as we survived it long enough for the right people to arrive. The Galactic Concord had been tracking our signal since we entered orbit. Once the field was triggered, they swept in like justice on borrowed time, arresting everyone who flinched the wrong way and confiscating enough evidence to keep a dozen courts busy for decades. Back on our ship, I collapsed into the pilot's chair and stared at the blinking nav screen like it owed me money. Veril sat across from me, her ears twitching slightly as the adrenaline wore off. "So," I said, "how long before they try to assassinate us?" "I give it a week," she replied. "2 if the bureaucracy jams up the hit orders. We could go into hiding. I hear the moons of Virex are lovely this time of century. We'd be bored within a cycle." She wasn't wrong. The call came 2 days later. Official commendations, offers of new titles, diplomatic posts, a chance to shape the peace we just birthed, kicking and screaming into existence. I turned most of them down. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because for the first time, I realized I didn't need the titles anymore. I wasn't the same man who had landed on Shirelon with a polished speech and a travel mug full of naive optimism. I'd been punched, threatened, kissed by an alien woman with better combat skills than most navies, and had watched truth topple power like a tired god. Varel stood beside me on the observation deck, watching the twin moons rise over the Concord Council's capital planet. They reflected off her violet eyes, casting strange, beautiful shadows. "So," I said, "now that we're not running for our lives, I need to ask you something important." She turned, one brow arched. "Is this about the scarf again? Because I told you it was a terrible disguise." I laughed. It's about what you said, back on Shirelon, when things were still a mess." I said many things. "You said you wished I could be your husband." She didn't flinch. "I remember. Well, I'm still human. You're still Zerlonian, but I think the galaxy might be flexible enough to make room for that." She studied me, the silence stretching. "Tarek Ryland," she said at last, "if I marry you, I expect at least 3 things. A proper ceremony, a promise to never wear that scarf again, and full access to your side of the bed." "That's a lot of demands," I said. "I've seen your laundry habits. I'm being generous." I extended a hand. She took it. Somewhere far away, old powers were falling. New ones were rising. The war had ended not with a treaty, but with 2 people who had no business trusting each other, deciding to do exactly that. And in the middle of it all, beneath the stars, between the ruins and the risks, we chose peace. Not just for the galaxy, but for each other. The Ornament